Periodically Productions presents Fairy Tales for Unwanted Children. The Dragon in the Staircase by Scott Thrower. Once upon a time, there was an elderly husband and an elderly wife who awoke from troubled dreams to the crash of a dragon in their garden. They rushed outside to see the beast sprawled among the cabbages just inside the towering ring of snow that pressed against the garden fence and rose so high that the sun was almost completely hidden. For a long moment they stood in their nightshirts and thought that the beast was dead. But finally it opened a gigantic eye and said, "I have flown far and wide, from the north to the south, from the east to the west, and this was the only spot of green I could find. Permit me to rest, and I promise to be gone, leaving naught but sweet dreams in my wake." And before the couple could answer, the exhausted creature fell asleep. As the couple dressed, they discussed their guest. Both knew the stories of these dragons, having heard the amazing dreams that people experienced from the slightest touch of their shadows. So they were both keen to allow the dragon to sleep. "Besides," said the wife to her husband, "where else could it go? If truly the snow had covered the entire world, asking it to leave would be a cruel thing indeed." And her husband had no choice but to agree. That day the couple busied themselves in the garden, quietly saving the pumpkins from beneath the beast's tail and chiseling back the snow and ice that had crept over the fence while they slept. His knees creaked loudly as he stooped for the vegetables, and her hands tightened up as she chipped at the ice. But by the end of the day, they settled in after a job very well done. "Do you think it's true," she said to he, as they settled down for soup near the fire, "that the entire world is covered and nowhere else remains?" "I think," he replied, "that if anyone had no reason to lie, it would be a mythical beast 3 times larger than the house and worn thin from travel." And so they settled into bed with forced smiles, trying not to think beyond the garden fence. Neither husband nor wife slept well that night, though they had fantastic dreams when they did, with fresh baked bread and warm breezes. And when morning came, they tried hard to convince each other that they were very well rested. He pretended that his knees were strong as he pulled on his trousers and boots. And she pretended that her hands were not sore as she fumbled at her buttons and gamely tried at her laces. In the end, he pretended it was normal to sit rather than kneel as he tightened the laces that she feigned were perfectly fine as they were. But on their way through the house to see if their dragon was awake, both stopped short at an unexpected sight. There in the kitchen, where there had been a wall, the couple now found an unexpected door. "Well, these certainly are strange times," he said to she, thrumming his fingers across his large belly. It was a wooden door of standard size, with its brass latch shiny from use, and it stood in the kitchen as if it always had. First she touched her head against the door, and when she shrugged, he tried the latch. The door swung open easily, and the couple leaned against each other as they looked into what should have been the corner of the dining room, and yet somehow was not. Instead, stone stairs descended deeply into silent, unmoving dark. And the longer they watched it, the more certain they became that it was watching them in return. "I think I hear voices," she said to he, and he leaned further forward to listen. "Should we go down?" he said to she, but in truth he was hoping they wouldn't. The stairs seemed steep, and he was quite sure that even if his knees allowed him to descend, there was no chance they'd bring him back up. "Perhaps we should not," she said to he, thinking of the steepness of the stairs and how poorly her hands could grip the railing. So instead, they closed the door and went out to check on the dragon, which was still asleep and curled around the house so that its tail nearly touched its nose. He fussed at the corn that had been knocked aside by the shifting sleeper, and she chipped away at the ice that had reached out to kiss the dragon's side. By the end of the day, they were both exhausted, and they ate mushy corn in a thick pumpkin soup, looking from the roaring kitchen fire to the mysterious door while listening to the snores of the sleeping dragon. They shuffled off to bed, talking about how lucky they were to have both a dragon as a house guest and a welcome mystery in the kitchen. As he blew out the candle, he heaved a great sigh that he hoped looked more like contentment than worry before saying, "I wonder what wonders tomorrow will bring." Once more the couple passed a restless night trying to convince each other that they were sleeping. Though in the moments they did drift away, they dreamt of sunny days and fields, children and fresh-cut grass. The next morning the couple stood in the kitchen and stared at the magical door. It was propped open with a kitchen stool, and he bent at the waist to look at a glittering item upon the floor. "It's a button," he said, pretending it was perfectly normal that he did not stoop down and pick up the silvery thing. "And this is a ring," she replied, pretending it was perfectly normal that she did not reach down and try and pluck it up with her misbehaving fingers. Indeed, every few steps was another small treasure that led to the mysterious stairs, and from the top they could see more glittering in the darkness below. Again they listened, and if anything, the din of voices seemed even louder than before. "Someone wishes us to follow," he said to she, and she nodded in reply. But to both the stairs felt even steeper today, and the banister harder to hold, so they quickly went outside to dig out their sleeping guest and pretend that the wall of snow hadn't started to close up above them, and that the garden fence looked fine encased in ice. As they salvaged the few remaining vegetables from the bulk of the dragon, and chipped back at the ice that held even more firmly to its scales, they guessed about where the stairs might lead until they were both too tired to continue. That night they were too exhausted to cook, and they supped on raw vegetables and the last of the cheese. They carefully avoided mentioning how little there was left to eat, or the way they hadn't managed to free a wing of the sleeping dragon from the encroaching ice today. In fact, the evening passed silently until they were tucked into bed in the darkness. "Perhaps we should try the stairs," she said to he, hoping he might find a safe place for himself down in the dark. "I'd hate to be rude to our guest," he replied, though he hoped she might find somewhere warm down below, away from the snow that was besting them and the hungry rumble of her tummy that he was pretending not to have heard. That night he was too exhausted to worry, and when he woke in the morning he found himself alone. It took 3 tries to get his knees to lift him, and he wanted to fall right back down into dreams, which this time had been of their wedding by the mill. Her hair had been brown instead of white and entwined with flowers and ribbon. Since he was unobserved this morning, he eased himself down the hall to the kitchen, nursing his joints as he went. And this time he was not surprised by the sight of what was before him. Crusty rolls were placed on the floor, each part of a path towards the stairs, and he smiled to think that whatever was luring them thought they'd be so easily convinced. Still, he was nibbling on one as he stepped into the garden to find his wife, but she was nowhere to be seen. Instead, he was looking into the enormous blue eyes of the dragon. "I'm in search of my wife," he said to it. "She's gone," it replied. "She must have gone down the stairs in the kitchen," the man said. "And since you seem to have recovered, I may try and join her," though in fact he was dreading the prospect. He was happy to think that she'd found her way out, and happier still when he saw that half of the enormous dragon had been swallowed up by the snow, because he had no faith that his knees would allow him to follow her. "I thank you for all the help you have been," the dragon said, looking down upon him, "but I regret that my need is not done. The snow holds me fast, and I suspect will swallow me whole without your help to release me again." The man pretended not to be pleased, not just because this fantastical beast needed his help, but because the thought of the stairs filled him with dread. As tired as he was from the garden and the ice, he wasn't sure he could trust his legs on an unknown number of stairs. His wife would be fine, he convinced himself, because she was with whoever had left silver and warm, crusty buns, whoever sent magical stairs to find them. And so the husband spent the day with the dragon, chipping away at the ice until the great beast was free again. But by then the sliver of light that still broke through the huge dome of snow above them had faded away, and the dragon decided to wait for morning before it flew off. Similarly, the husband put himself to bed one last time, convincing himself that by morning he would feel strong enough to descend, and telling himself his wife would be fine for the night as a guest of whoever had brought the stairs. In the morning, it took the man 7 tries to climb out of bed. In his head was the fading memory of his children, as they had been when they were young. When he was finally up, he looked out the window to see the darkened yard, but all he could see was the immense blue eye of the dragon reflecting in his candlelight. "You seem better," he said to it, throwing open the window to the cold winter air. "Hungry, but strengthened," the dragon replied. "But you won't like what morning brings." The candle almost dropped from its holder as the husband hurried from the room. A moment later he was crashing into the kitchen, almost tumbling as he went. He turned towards the magical door to the mysterious stairs, but instead, he found a wall. An empty wall where the door had been. And in the middle of the room was a stack of wood and a crate of food, as well as warm clothing to wear. Through the kitchen window the man saw the dragon, peering in through the open door to the yard. "I suppose you waited too long," it said to him. "But at least we've got more here to eat." The husband nodded, all at once sad that his wife was gone, but also grateful she was safe somewhere the snow could not reach. As the dragon watched, he sorted through the crate of breads and meats, vegetables and fruit. Then he picked up the bundle of clothing and found a warm husband-sized coat that felt thick between his fingers, with a fur rim to the hood and deep pockets for his hands. He held it up for the dragon to see and slipped it on before looking back at the pile. On the very top was a second coat, slightly smaller than the first, perfectly sized for the shape of a wife. The husband turned to stare at the window that was filled with the blue eye of the dragon, and as they watched each other, neither could find a way to pretend anything nice at all. Did you find a moral for this week's story? Let us know on Twitter at periodicallypod, or join the Fairy Tales for Unwanted discussion group on Facebook. For more fairy tales for unwanted children, join us at unwantedchildren.ca.